Alright, hi everyone. I hope you guys are having a great day today. So this week our lecture is going to focus on the theories and therapies of Rogers. So we will see that Rogers would be considered another humanistic theorist, so he would be similar to some of the things we discussed last week. However, we will see that Rogers is going to be different from some of the other people we've talked about this semester. And one thing is that what Rogers had to say influenced people even outside of the humanistic theory. So scientists and researchers and clinicians today still use some of the same terminology and some of the same ideas, at least in part. So he was a very influential theorist as well. So today's lecture is going to be very important as we talk about Rogers, but we do not have an activity for this week. However, you will have exam 2. So remember that exam 2 is going to be released on Monday, March 6th at noon, so 12 p.m., and it'll be available until noon on the following Monday. So you'll have a week to take it. You do not have an activity, so watch the video for this week. Good start on that. Also, make sure to watch the review video. I'm going to have a brief video posted where I talk about the study guide. And then as you prepare and study for the exam, letting me know if you have any questions, there will be a practice exam for extra credit available just as we had for exam 1. So the practice exam will be open at the same time the regular exam is open, so you can take it first, get a little extra credit, and maybe give some ideas of what my test questions will look like. Okay? So don't forget about the exam. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get into lecture for today. Alright, so this week we're going to be talking about Carl Rogers. Now, right away you're going to notice some things about Carl Rogers that are very different from some of the other therapists that we've already talked about this semester. So, first of all, Rogers is going to be considered a humanistic therapist or a humanistic theorist, similar to Maslow as we talked about last week. But something that's different when we come to Rogers is the idea that most of the theorists that we've talked about this semester have developed a theory about personality, and then based on that, they had recommendations about therapy. So this is what I believe about personality, and based off of that, this is how we should treat psychological disorders. This is where psychological disorders come from. On the other hand, Carl Rogers jumped straight into therapy, and then from his experience working with clients, he developed his own kind of theory based on his therapy. So the therapy came first. He was working with his clients, treating his clients, and he started practicing this person-centered therapy, or you might hear client-centered therapy. And once he had developed and formed his ideas about therapy, from there he developed his theory of personality. You're going to see that his theory of personality is very parsimonious. It's relatively straightforward. It's not overly complex. And something else that you will see is that it is very optimistic, and it focuses mostly on the conscious. We're not going to see much of a focus on the unconscious, which would be very different from some of the theories that we started off the semester talking about. So jumping into Rogers, Rogers was born in Illinois. He was the fourth of 6 children. He grew up relatively sheltered. At some point they moved to a farm, and they were kind of separate from society. His parents were devoutly religious, and so he was raised in a fairly strict religious home. And this then influenced his career choices. So he grew up on a farm and was interested in science. And so he originally was going to be doing some research and working on agriculture. But then, because of his religious upbringing, he decided to attend seminary, which he did briefly, intending to become a minister, a member of the clergy, but then changed his mind and started working on psychology and ended up earning a PhD. From there, he began working as a clinician, and as we've already said, he developed this person-centered or client-centered therapy, and that's really the term that he would prefer here as a client. And today, this is one of the influences of Carl Rogers. Today, typically, if we're talking about an outpatient setting, we do refer to our clients as clients. It's hard for me to even think of another word. I was always taught clients. This is different from patients. I mean, think about the difference. A patient, using the word patient, sounds more like an individual who is sick or someone who is disordered, someone who maybe we think about like a hospital setting. On the other hand, client, the terminology there is intended to give some respect to the individual to say that, yes, maybe they're coming because they have issues, but that they are capable of reaching some resolution to those issues there. So client is going to be a term that Rogers is going to use that's going to be different from what maybe Freud, for example, would use. So he came up with his ideas about therapy. He was briefly the president of the American Psychological Association. He spent a lot of time doing therapy, and then later on he started this Center for the Studies of the Person, which is going to be based off of his theory, which was derived from his therapeutic experience. So, person-centered theory based on person-centered therapy. So, as I said, Carl Rogers is going to be a very optimistic therapist or theorist here. His basic assumption has something to do with what we talked about last week with Maslow. So we said that Maslow had this idea of self-actualization, which with Maslow, it was like our peak of our hierarchy of needs, the most difficult to complete, the idea that we become kind of their best self, or we meet our full potential. Well, Rogers had a similar idea here with this actualizing tendency. Rogers would suggest, as most humanists would suggest, that individuals, people, are generally good, and they are motivated to grow. They're motivated to be healthy, both physically healthy and psychologically healthy. And so then the idea is that our basic tendency is to do things that are good for us physically and psychologically. Of course, at some point, as you're going to see down here when we talk about issues that cause psychological problems, at some point we may run into a barrier that prevents us from doing the things that we should be doing. But Rogers would say that people are basically good, that they are motivated to grow. And so we have this actualizing tendency where we are working towards becoming a fully functioning person. So Rogers would say that every person is working towards this, but then not every person achieves this, as we've seen from other theorists as well. There is kind of a theme here, especially in the second section of the course, of the belief that there is this ideal level of psychological functioning and not everyone reaches it. And then different people have different ideas about what that looks like and what prevents us from reaching that. But Rogers says, once again, we have this basic tendency to become self-actualized, to work towards that, although not everyone does reach it. So Rogers had this idea of your self-concept versus your ideal self. Now, this is just like it sounds like. Your self-concept is what you believe about yourself. Now, your self-concept probably started developing in childhood, but it's continually being influenced. It's constantly changing. And then once it's fairly set, that really influences the way that we see the world. So you have a self-concept. You have a belief about yourself, about whether you're a good person or a bad person. You have a belief about what areas of maybe school that you're good at and what you're not good at, what personality characteristics you hold. You have a self-concept. Now, some individuals have a very positive self-concept where they generally believe themselves to be good people, they like themselves, they're proud of their accomplishments. We also see sometimes individuals who have a negative self-concept where they believe that they're not persons of value, that they don't have inherent worth, they don't feel like they have been successful, that kind of thing. But we all have a self-concept. Now, your self-concept is where you believe you are at the moment. Your ideal self is where you want to be. So we all have goals of what we want for ourselves. The way that you get at this with a client you might ask the question, well, let's imagine that while you went to sleep, a miracle happened. And when you woke up, everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was exactly how you wanted it to be. What would that look like? So we all have this belief about our very best day, being our very best self. Like, for example, what kind of a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or girlfriend would we be? What kind of parent would we be? What kind of career would we have if we were our ideal self? Now, follow me here. A person who feels like their self-concept is not very far away from their ideal self is likely to be a pretty happy person. Maybe I haven't completely reached it. Maybe I still have some work to do, but I'm on my way. I'm getting there. Now, what would it feel like if you were a person and you realized that your self-concept was not matching up with your ideal self at all? That you felt like you were miles away from where you should be. Maybe you feel like you haven't been behaving the way you should. Maybe you feel like you haven't met the goals that you set for yourself. You're not happy. So Rogers would suggest that everyone has a self-concept and an understanding of who we are right now. Everyone has an ideal self, an understanding of who we truly wish we could be. This is kind of like our best self. The difference between your self-concept and your ideal self impacts the way that you see yourself, whether you feel good about yourself, whether you have psychological health, right? So we'll come back to that in just a second. And once again, if you have any questions about any of these concepts, please let me know. We're not going to be having an activity this week, so I won't be able to check in on your understanding in that way, but please feel free to come by my office hours or shoot me an email if you have any questions, right? So basically, Rogers is believing that people are good, that we have an understanding of who we are, we have an understanding of where we are going, and hopefully we're making strides to get from where we are to where we want to be. Now, this is the closest thing you're going to get to a Freudian discussion here related to Rogers. Rogers is very much focused on what we are consciously aware of. However, Rogers would say we have levels of awareness. This is kind of similar to Freud's beliefs about the unconscious and the preconscious and the conscious, right? So with Rogers, what we're saying here is the first level would be the level of awareness where things are ignored or denied, or they don't even make it into our conscious. So basically, Rogers would say we do have some aspects of our awareness that are unconscious, a little bit. We do have some of that going on. Then we have a level of our awareness where we see something happening, we allow it to come into our awareness, but we distort it, we twist it, and we want it to fit our self-concept, so we change it a little bit, which means that we are aware of something, but we're not aware of the truth. We distort it and change it to make it fit what we already believe about ourselves. Then finally, that third level of awareness is where we see something happening, we become aware of it, we let it in, and it already lines up with our self-concept, so we allow ourselves to see it accurately. Okay? Now, let's have an example for this. Okay? Imagine that someone believes that they are a good parent. Okay? Now, they may have some aspects of their experience that suggest that they're not a good parent, and they are so intense and they would be so hurtful and damaging that the person ignores them, denies them, they don't even become aware of them, potentially. Then maybe there are some aspects of their life that point to them not being the kind of parent they want to be. They become aware of those, right? But maybe they try to twist it and they try to distort it. Well, I really wasn't doing that to harm my child. I had good intentions. I had good reasonings. It really wasn't that big of a deal. They distort it. You see this. They downplay it. They believe that they're a good parent. And so when they see these other things happening, they become aware of them, and that doesn't line up with their self-concept. They have to try to find a way to change that, to distort it, or to twist it. And then finally, maybe there are some parts of their awareness where they say, oh, see, look at that. I did that. I was a good parent there. That they allow themselves to see in a way that is realistic. So that comes in, it matches their self-concept, so they allow it to come in the way that it is. Now, then let's have the reverse example here. What if someone believes that they're a bad person? Maybe they think they're a bad parent, okay? So that maybe there are times when they're being a good parent, but they don't even pay attention to it. They don't even let that into their awareness. Or maybe they see themselves being a good parent, they let it into their awareness, but they distort it, okay? Well, that was just an accident. I didn't really mean to do that. I can't always do that. And they distort it and they twist it. And then finally, when they see themselves doing things that are not ideal parenting, that matches their self-concept. So they'll pay attention to that. They'll latch onto that. They'll see that as it truly is, right? The basic idea here with Carl Rogers is the idea behind this is like cognitive dissonance. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the idea of cognitive dissonance, but it's kind of the idea that we have an understanding of ourselves, what we believe about ourselves, a self-concept, but sometimes we don't behave in ways that match up with our self-concept, and that makes us uncomfortable. That causes us distress when we see ourselves doing things that don't line up with what we think we should be doing or who we think we truly are. That distresses us, and we have to find a way to make ourselves feel better. Rogers would suggest that one of the ways that we do that is to distort something. We distort it so that our self-concept is maintained. Whatever we believe about ourselves, whether it be positive or negative, we want to continue to believe that. And so we distort the world sometimes to convince ourselves that the world is truly the way that we see it. This means, though, that someone who has a negative self-concept, they won't pay attention to anything that is against that negative self-concept, okay? So maybe you know the person that they're always negative about themselves. They don't like themselves. Maybe they think they're not attractive, or they think they're not competent. They think they're not good at their jobs. Well, what do they do when someone compliments them? They say, oh, no, you don't really mean that. They don't know how to take a compliment. They think, oh, well, maybe the person wants something from me because surely I'm not, right? Now, we all do this sometimes. Maybe there's a certain area that you're not very good at. Like, for example, if I'm being honest, I'm not a very good cook. There are a few things I can do that are okay, but I'm not culinarily inclined. So if someone compliments my cooking, sometimes I get a little suspicious, right? Like, okay, maybe. It's okay, it's decent, but it's not great. And so then you start asking yourself, okay, I know I'm not a good cook, and this person is saying I'm a good cook, and I can't possibly be a good cook. So then you start distorting what the person is saying. You don't allow what they're saying to change what you believe. You maintain the belief you already have, and you distort what they're saying, okay? So if you already have a negative self-view or self-concept, then even positive experiences you'll distort or deny or refuse to let them change. So this is why a person who is depressed is going to struggle. Because even when positive things happen to them, they either ignore it so much that it becomes unconscious, or they distort it to say that it's really not that positive, or it really wasn't because of me, or it's not going to happen again. They don't allow themselves to be happy. So we can see then that there are different levels of awareness. We have something that's unconscious. We don't even know it's there. We have some things that we know they're there, but we twist them. We don't see them accurately. And then some things, because they already match our self-concept, we allow those to come into our awareness and we take them as they are realistically. So you might be aware of this if you pay attention to other people. It's easier to see it in other people than it is in yourself. But maybe you know a person who is living in a world they've created. Like their view of reality seems completely unrealistic to you. Well, maybe it's because they have formed this self-concept that they are not willing to change. And so then they have to find a way to twist things, even to the point that they're deluding themselves because they can't change what they view about themselves in the world. Okay, so the basic idea here then is we're going to have to find a way to help these people. Why does this happen? Why do we start to feel this way? Well, remember that Rogers says that everyone has this actualizing tendency where everyone wants to grow and they want to become their best self. So what is it that gets in the way and prevents some people from reaching it? Well, a few things down here as far as barriers to psychological help. One of these is called conditions of worth. Now, you're going to see this in a future slide when we talk about Rogers' therapy. Remember that his theory is derived from his therapy. So Rogers' therapy, as we're going to discuss, one of the things that he would say is so important is that we have this unconditional positive regard. What that means is that we treat other people with love and respect regardless. The idea that being a person, being you, means that you deserve love and respect. It's not because of who you are or what you do for someone that then qualifies you for love and respect. It should be unconditional. Unconditional means you get it regardless of what you do, okay? So, like, for example, I have unconditional positive regard for my children. I adore my children. I love my children. And there's nothing they could do to change that. Well, Rogers would say we should treat all people that way. And especially, as you're going to see, therapists need to treat their clients that way. So, this is where we come into a problem here. When a client they feel like they have had conditions of worth placed on them. So, someone might be intending to grow and become the best person that they are, but the people in their lives don't love them the way they should be loved or way they deserve to be loved, according to Rogers. They're not getting this unconditional love. Maybe they feel like I'm only accepted when I behave a certain way. Now think about that. If you're only loved and accepted when you behave a certain way, then that changes the way you feel like you have to be. Now all the time you're under pressure to be something else, something fake, something different, something that's not who you truly are. So Rogers would say, if the client is surrounding themselves or has been surrounded by individuals who only want them for what they can do for them, that's going to keep them from being their best self. And we can see that could happen, right? Incongruence is kind of going back to what we've been talking about this kind of cognitive dissonance idea. It's the idea that my self-concept, who I truly believe I am, it's not lining up with what I'm seeing in the world. Okay, it's not lining up with what's going on with me. And that makes us feel uncomfortable. And this can produce anxiety, right? So we have a self-concept and we feel threatened when there's any kind of evidence to suggest that our self-concept is wrong, right? So maybe if you believe that you're an honest person, but then you realize that you've been behaving dishonestly, that really hurts you. It hurts you because now your self-concept has been threatened. So how are we going to handle that situation? Well, oftentimes to try to avoid this incongruence or this feeling like what's going on is not accurately reflecting my self-concept of who I think I am, we become defensive. And that's when we start distorting or denying something. This is the person who feels like they're truly honest. So whenever they catch themselves being dishonest, they'll either A, deny it at all, like that wasn't a lie. They'll try to convince themselves they truly believed the lie they told. Or they'll say, well, it was okay to lie. They'll start justifying. It was okay to lie in that particular situation because it was to spare someone's feelings or that kind of thing. So we don't want to feel this incongruence, this feeling that whatever's going on in our life is not matching up with who we believe we are. So to try to avoid that, we become defensive. Why is that a problem? We all do it to a certain extent. It becomes a problem when you have distorted and denied to the point that you're completely out of touch with who you truly are. Remember that Rogers says that your self-concept, who you believe you are, should be working towards your ideal self, who you want to be and who you should be. So at this point, this individual might find themselves in a situation where because maybe they felt like they had to be somebody else to get love, or maybe they feel like they can't be who they want to be, so they have to lie to themselves. This person is not working towards harmony in themselves. They're actually disorganized and all over the place. So Rogers would say this is why people have psychological issues. Which then leads us to the question, how are we going to help this person? So remember that Rogers formed his therapeutic approach, and then based off of that, formed his ideas about the theories, the personality. So the psychotherapy, the therapy, which would be person-centered or client-centered therapy of Rogers, Rogers says that every client has inherent value and worth. Now think about that. The only thing that you believe about a client when they walk in the door is you are valued. You have value and I respect you. Now think about some of the things that other people, other theorists might suggest. Freud might say, okay, whoever you are, when you walk in my door, you want to sleep with your opposite sex parent. You have all of these unconscious conflicts, right? You're completely obsessed with sex and aggression, and if you argue with me, I'll just say it's unconscious. I mean, can we see this is a very different approach? I'm not making any kind of assumptions about you. As a matter of fact, Rogers would be offended by other theorists suggesting that they know more about the client than the client. Client-centered therapy suggests that the client is in the driver's seat. They are the one that has the knowledge to be able to produce change in themselves. That the therapist is necessary only as like a guide for them, but that the client is the one that's going to have to be responsible for their own change. So other kinds of therapists might say, I'm the expert, you come to me and I'll fix you. Well, Rogers would say that the client is the expert on his or her own experience. And so then he's there more as a guide than the expert. Okay? So what he would say is that there are these necessary and sufficient conditions. Necessary, obviously, we have to have all three of these, and the client will not get better if we don't. But sufficient means this is all you need, and the client will get better if you do have these three things. So this is what Rogers says you need. First of all, you need a congruent counselor. So we said incongruence happens when your self-concept is not lining up with the experiences that you're having in your life. So congruence then means that your self-concept is lining up with the experiences that you're having in your life. So the counselor, Rogers would say, needs to be congruent in his or her own experience. Now this is a characteristic of the counselor that then has to happen before the client walks in the door. This is something that the counselor has to take care of. So we want to make sure, I mean, think about this. If someone else is having the same problem that you're having, and they're not able to fix their own problem or get their own problem fixed, can they help you with your problem? This is the question. So then Rogers would say that the therapist needs to make sure that congruence has been met before therapy begins. And then, once we get into that, then you show the client unconditional positive regard and you have empathetic listening. So you show empathy for the client. So we said that unconditional positive regard is the idea that everyone, by nature of being a person, deserves respect and deserves love. and deserves that unconditionally, regardless of whether or not they screw up, regardless of what they achieve in their lives. They deserve unconditional positive regard. And Rogers would say that as the therapist, you may be the only person in the client's life that gives them this. They may have never experienced this before. They may not even know what that looks like or what that feels like. But Rogers would say, you need this. You need this in therapy in order for the client to get better. So what would that look like? This would look like a therapist who does not judge the client, who does not try to tell the client what is right and what is wrong, who does not try to impose his or her own will onto the client, but rather just listens and shows them empathy. So when we talk about empathy here, we're talking about being able to understand someone else's feelings, being able to feel something with them. So empathy is sometimes confused with the word sympathy. They sound similar, but sympathy is like being able to, like, you feel for someone and you feel sorry for them. Empathy is a little bit different. It's like being able to feel what they're feeling at the moment. So sometimes you see someone else going through something, you've gone through it too, and you can feel that, right? Maybe you've had a loss of a family member or a health struggle, or maybe you've gone through a certain difficult time in your academic career, whatever the case may be. You've walked through something difficult, and now you're seeing someone else walk through it, and you feel for that person, you understand. So imagine going to a therapist and having the therapist truly care about you in a way that is not dependent on anything that you do, and then have them listen to you and express that they understand your emotions and that they're walking this with you. That in and of itself sounds simple. I mean, it sounds basic. But sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes this is enough. So Rogers would suggest that this is necessary and sufficient. Now, the first time the client walks through your door, they might not know what to do with your unconditional positive regard and your empathetic listen. I mean, they might expect you to now tell them what to do. They're going to walk in and say, I've got a problem. I want you to fix me. So then, if you're doing this person-centered kind of therapy, you have to help them see that that's not what you're going to do. You're not going to tell them what to do. You're not going to fix them. You're going to help them fix themselves. So we have these stages of therapeutic change, basically going from the client walks in the door and they're completely shut off and unwilling to be vulnerable. And then gradually we work to a point where they're willing to be vulnerable with you. So when the client first walks in, they might not be willing to communicate with you at all. They might not be willing to, and might not be able to. And then gradually they'll get to the point where they can talk to you, but only about external things, right? So maybe what's going on at work or what's going on with their family or their friends, but they're talking about other people. And then eventually they might start talking about themselves in kind of like an objective way or a very like non-emotional way. And then if they're continuing to feel comfortable with you, they might start talking about past experiences, past emotions, which is still making themselves vulnerable. But then as they become more comfortable, they'll be able to talk about their present emotions, so what they're feeling right now. Now, Rogers would say that eventually, after having done this for a period of time, and this takes time, I mean, we're forming a relationship here. After doing this for a period of time, the client will then become comfortable enough to become completely vulnerable with paying attention to their experiences now, and they don't distort them anymore, and they don't deny them anymore. They allow themselves to become aware of what's going on, even if it's not consistent with their self-concept. So Rogers would say, in a way that we try to protect ourselves by distorting or denying anything that doesn't line up with our self-concept. But if you're in a situation where you're completely accepted and you're being listened to intently, after a while, you'll start to feel comfortable enough to really be honest with yourself and with the therapist. So then, once you reach that point, the client could grow. They can change, right? Now, we're going to see client-centered therapy. I said child there. Client-centered therapy is probably going to be mostly with adults, but we could use some of this with kids as well. Kids need this from their parents. They need their parents to be congruent, if at all possible. They need their parents to give them unconditional positive regard. They need their parents to listen to them, feel their emotions with them, right? So that's very important. So Rogers would say the final stage here is irreversible growth and change in a positive way, right? And that the reason why we're able to do this is because of this relationship with the therapist, because we received the things we needed, someone who is sincere with us and loving with us and patient with us, because of that, we're able now to explore things even if they're scary, even if our self-concept is begging us to distort and deny. We can finally start to approach that. What that means is we can truly understand our self-concept. And once we truly understand where we are, then we can look forward to where we're going, to our ideal self. So then the outcomes here, what we're seeing, if our therapy was successful, and Rogers would suggest that these are the necessary and sufficient conditions for it to be successful, then the client will be more congruent. So their environment and what's going on will match up with their self-concept more. Their gap between their true self and their ideal self will become lessened. So who they really are and who they want to be, that'll be coming closer and closer together. They'll feel better. They'll have less psychological tension and physiological tension as well. This could improve health. You can imagine that someone's anxiety, depression, and other things can damage their physical health as well. This will improve their relationships with people in their lives and make them more accepting of themselves and probably other people as well. So Rogers would say there is much to be benefited from with this kind of therapy. So the idea here, as we've kind of seen as a theme throughout the second section of the course, is that there is a version of you, and Rogers called this the person of tomorrow, right? Which I think sounds like a great name for a movie. The person of tomorrow is basically the fully functioning you, the most psychologically healthy version of yourself now. So this is similar to Maslow's self-actualized person, right? We're seeing here that psychologically healthy people are adaptable to their environment. They're flexible. So if you've been constantly denying and distorting and lying to yourself, you lose some flexibility there. It's harder to adapt. So now they're open to experiences. They're not afraid of coming face to face with something that scares them or makes them feel like their self-concept is inadequate. They live fully in the moment, so they're not going to be so much focused on the past or the future, but focusing on where they are right now. Having better relationships with other people, more integrated. So Rogers did say you do have an unconscious part of who you are, and this needs to be combined with your conscious. And then we basically trust human nature. Okay, here's an idea. Here's the concept. This does not necessarily mean you should trust everyone. We all know you should not. But the idea here is that you should trust certain people. There should be people in your life, and I hope that you all have this person in your life who gives you those things that you need, Rogers would say. So like someone who's sincere and genuine with you, someone who listens to you, feels empathy for you, someone who gives you unconditional positive regard. And Rogers would say that if you have that, you trust that person. You're willing to be vulnerable with that person, and you understand that not everyone has to like you, and not everyone has to want to be your best friend. As long as you have those people who give you those things that you need, you don't have to have everybody else. You don't need that many friends. Maybe you just need one person. Maybe one person is enough for you, right? And so then you'll enjoy more richness out of life, being genuinely who you are and not running away from who you are, basically. So we said that Rogers came up with his idea of therapy first. So obviously when we're doing therapy, we want to know if our therapy is effective, because it seems unethical to continue to do therapy if it's not effective. So there's a large research study here that Rogers did. So he had these hypotheses. Remember that a hypothesis is a specific testable prediction that is consistent with our theory. So we've already talked about Rogers' theory. You know about Rogers' theory. So based on Rogers' theory, he had these hypotheses. He's going to do, and you're going to see this in a second, he's going to do this client-centered or person-centered therapy. And his expectation, his hypotheses are that the clients who receive that therapy will become more aware of their feelings and experiences. So they're not going to distort. They're going to see the world and themselves for how it truly is. The gap between the real self, or your self-concept, and your ideal self will lessen. So you'll be closer to who you want to be. And you'll be more socialized. In other words, you'll have better relationships with other people and better relationships with yourself. So these are all of the outcomes that Rogers would expect to find if someone had received his style of therapy. So what he did was he found adults who wanted therapy, And typically, larger universities have counseling centers, or even smaller universities sometimes as well have counseling centers. So these were adults that were coming to the University of Chicago's counseling center looking for therapy. So what they did, they had a rather complex study here. So for the adults who were seeking therapy, they split them into two groups. They split them into a group of people who received the therapy immediately, and they split them into a group of people who had to wait 60 days before receiving therapy. So this is going to be part of our control group. In addition, they also brought in a group of people who were not seeking therapy. So it calls them normals here in parentheses, as if such a thing exists. But these are adults who were matched, like the same age, the same gender, a lot of those things, very similar to the people, except that these individuals were not seeking therapy. So now we'll be able to see how are the individuals who went through this therapy different from other people wanting therapy who haven't got it yet? And how are they different from other people who are, we say, normal? I don't like that term so much, but individuals who are not having psychological problems right now, how are they different from them? So here's what we found. The therapy group, but not the control group, showed a lessening of the gap between real self and ideal self. So right here, we're seeing that our hypothesis, one of our hypotheses, is supported that the group that received the therapy, they felt like who they truly are was more in reach for them when they finished the study than when they started the study. Clients, the ones who improved, especially the ones that improved the most, did show changes in their social behavior. So maybe they started being more friendly, more open, more accepting of other people, more accepting of themselves, that then improved their relationships with other people. So the clients here are feeling closer to who they want to be, and they're having better relationships. So we're seeing that. However, what we did see, the therapy group got better, and they stayed better. They retained their improvement even when they checked on them later. However, they did not get to the level of psychological health that the control group had. So if we started off with a group of people that were already what we would call psychologically healthy, the group that received the therapy improved over their peers that were seeking therapy that did not get the therapy right away, but they did not improve to the point that they were what we would call psychologically healthy. So there was still maybe some work to be done here. A lot of therapists are eclectic in their approach, meaning they combine things from different theories. So most people, even if they don't necessarily call themselves humanistic therapists, most people recognize the value of what Rogers is saying here, of showing empathy and affection, not affection in the way that we think of affection, but the love and respect, basically. Not that you would be affectionate with your client in a way that you would be with other people, but rather that you would see that they are a person who is deserving of affection and love, and that you respect them in a way that maybe they haven't received from other people. So it's showing that they have inherent value in who they are, which they might not believe themselves, but that Rogers would say is true of all of us. Very good. So Rogers' theory, it's a pretty good one. It's very high on practicality, so it tells you exactly what to do with a client. So we have that. It's internally consistent. It's falsifiable. We could take people and give them a situation where they're not getting unconditional positive regard and this genuine empathy and see how they do. So we could falsify this. Parsimony is fairly simple. It organizes knowledge. There has been research on it, maybe not as much as on some of the other theories, but it's a good theory. So as we've already touched on a little bit, Rogers had a theory that focused on free choice. So you have to make the decision and take the steps that are necessary in order to get better. So it's not that the therapist makes you better, it's that you make yourself better, and the therapist is just there to allow you to do that, to help you. It's a very optimistic theory. And it focuses on uniqueness in that all people need these same things. So it's not saying that some people need this and some people need something else. It's saying all of us need unconditional positive regard. All of us need genuine empathy, right? He did talk about the unconscious briefly, but mostly in a way that's negative, as in someone maybe their unconscious is causing them to deny something or not pay attention to something that is true. Rogers focused primarily on the conscious here, and social influences, if you think about it, Rogers was very much focused on your relationships. You need people in your lives that will give you these things. So Rogers is focused less on biology, more on your nurture, your relationships. Very good. So that is the end of lecture for today. We do not have an activity for this week, but you will have a lecture video and a review video this week. So after you've watched this video, there will also be a review video posted where I will briefly touch on some of the things on the study guide. And you will have exam 2. It's going to be released on Monday, March 6th. It'll be available until the next Monday, so it's going to be released at noon. It's going to close at noon on the following Monday. So let me know if you have any questions as you start to prepare. There will also be a practice exam for extra credit, just like there was for the first exam. Let me know if you need anything. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys later.